Yesterday, we talked schedule. Today, we talk players. Iowa State has added a pair of dogs to their football roster, and they could very well be the reason this team goes to back-to-back conference championships and this year brings home the Big 12 title. Today on Locked On Cyclones.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to you for making this your first watch or listen of the day every single day. I appreciate it more than you know. Wherever you're watching or listening, be sure to subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. Today, we're talking football. 2 new recruits to this 2025 class, and then obviously we'll touch on the transfer portal a little bit too. Where's this football team squaring up after we talked about the schedule yesterday? Then the women in the basketball match that went on yesterday take down Cincinnati. We'll break that down. And then last but not least, can the men regain that top title as top dog, if you will, in the men's basketball sphere? That'll be coming up in the third segment. Before we get that far, however, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's dive right on into it. Yesterday, you all know, I said I do think Iowa State very well has a path to make it back to the Big 12 championship game. I like the way that the buys were split up. I like that we only have to go on the road twice, back-to-back games twice, and one of them being leading into the conference championship game. So effectively, really only once. I've taken a look at the schedule over and over, and sometimes you look at it and you're like, actually, maybe it's not going to be that easy. But then you look at it again, and you're like, okay, well, to be completely honest, we don't really know what's going to happen. Obviously, the squad show, we broke it down quite a bit. And, JT Westersoul of Locked On Utes made a good point. Like, we all asked, do you think Houston's going to win the Big 12 title this year? And everyone's like, no. And then he said, do you think we said that about Arizona State last year? So to be completely honest, I can't tell you right now what Iowa State's record will be. We've got all offseason to break it down and the moves that will be made and this, that, and the other thing and make predictions. But guess what? They're just predictions. That being said, I can't tell you how much of a serious topic this is. It's not a prediction. It's a real thing. Iowa State added two new class of 2025 recruits to their recruiting list here. Iowa State has added BJ Carter, a defensive lineman, and Jaden Jackson, a running back. By all my marks, unless I am incorrect, the only running back coming in to Iowa State this year. Obviously, we all know Carson Hansen kind of took over that main spot at running back with Abu Sama kind of right behind him there. This year was definitely not what I think a lot of people expected from Abu. And then Carson Hansen, we saw last year with, especially on defense, add a little bit of depth, always a good thing. Well, let's first talk about BJ Carter, because obviously the defensive line is, in my opinion, really what is pivotal about this Iowa State team and is the determiner of whether or not they make it back to the Big 12 championship game. Obviously, we'll have to fill the Higgins and Knowles spots, but you've got Rocco returning, you got Carson. Why am I saying Carson Beck? Carson Hansen returning. Wow, that was rough. That being said, Gabe Burkle, like we've got guys. Defensive line is kind of where my main concern is, and then how do they replace the one and only Bo Fraley? Anyways, BJ Carter coming in from Middleburg, Florida, and 10 sacks in his career, 143 tackles, ranked overall at where is it? This is a big list. So we got 21 dudes coming in. 3-star prospect, top 150 defensive lineman nationally ranked by 24/7 Sports. He will join the likes, of a Jack Limbaugh, out of Algona, and then we've also got Kamari Moore, Trey Verdon, and then Charlie Wolbeck. Obviously, Trey, the brother of Malik Verdon. So definitely an emphasis by this team, by the staff, I guess, on the defensive line position. But I want to talk a little bit more about this Jaden Jackson guy, because this guy could be just beyond exceptional. Very well could be. And it is a name I want to put in your ear now. So that way in 6, 7, 8 months, he's not a surprise when he comes in against, probably not Iowa, maybe not at Kansas State, but I believe it's what is it? Arkansas State, I think, is who we play that third game. Maybe he comes in there and he could very well rush for like 150 yards. Like very, very realistically. Jaden Jackson out of Franklin, Texas, coming in at a 5'11", 215 pounds, has rushed for more than 8,000 rushing yards in his career. Wow. And if you're like, what does that number even mean? What does that really mean? I mean, I know they play about 4 years. If he played all 4, that's about 2,000 yards a year. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't really know. Let me just put this little statistic in your ear for some context here. That's the 13th player in Texas high school football history to reach that mark. 13th. How many players have played Texas high school football? Do you think it's more than 14? I mean, 13th player in history, totaled 8,035 yards, 114 rushing touchdowns. And then on top of that, well, obviously you got to have a lot of good games. He had 38 100-yard rushing games. That's unbelievable. In his senior year, rushed for 2,386 yards and 35 touchdowns. That's 12.6 yards per carry. Now, I will say this seems like low-hanging fruit because it's so easy to just, I mean, obviously I'm not a coach. I'm not a player. My closest actual direct relationship with this is my NCAA dynasty mode. I'm not even rushing for that many yards of carry in a video game. This dude is doing at the highest level. I mean, it's unbelievable. So I actually do really like this addition, especially considering we haven't had a lot of focus on the running back. And that's a great segue into who is coming back in this year to the program, or who is joining the program because we've talked about it, when the portal opened, but we haven't talked about it in a few weeks with basketball doing what it's doing. Remember, at receiver, to fill the Higgins and null void, we've got Xavier Townsend of UCF, friend of Rocco Becht. I am going to keep hammering that point. That seems to be something that maybe not enough people are talking about. I do think that's a big deal. Friends, chemistry's there, big deal. Then you got Chase Sowell out of East Carolina coming in at that wide receiver position as well. 6'4", 195, ranked 16th. Out of like the receivers that were moving. So big get there. And then you get to the defensive side of the ball. You've got Cannon Butler out of UNI, Vontroy Malone out of Tulsa, both at that defensive end position. And then Trey Bell, the DB from Linden One, who dog 6'3", 190, 191 is what he's listed here on this site. Obviously, defensive focus, and rightfully so. Defense was good last year. I think we were like third in the nation in pass defense going into that conference championship game. Obviously, that game didn't go perfectly. I mean, we didn't end at third in the nation, but defensive line was kind of that point of if we get we've got good coverage, guys. Let's just pressure the quarterback a little bit here, and these games could go wildly different. I absolutely think that is the point that this team needs to kind of emphasize, and it looks like they're doing that through recruiting, be it from high school or in the transfer portal, in that immediate impact. Because now, to be completely candid, 21 freshmen coming in is my count at this time. I could be wrong. I'm not the best with numbers. How many of them will see direct, like who will go right onto the field, who will make direct impact right away? I hope all of them. I hope every single player plays meaningful minutes and makes big plays. Okay, I hope that. But realistically, that's not necessarily the case. Okay, there's a real chance that maybe Jaden Jackson is this dog running back, but only sees 2-3 carries a game. So it's hard to really tell exactly what kind of numbers they're going to get as far as carries and how much impact do they have. But at least Iowa State is doing their due diligence and bringing in those defensive linemen to, at least at the very minimum, they're saying the more times you roll the die, the more chances you have at rolling a 3. That's just a random number, a random pick. But if you roll a dice once to get a 1 out of 6 number, any number, pick any number, that's less likely to happen than if you rolled 100 times. It's actually more likely, I would say, that you would roll a die 100 times and somehow not roll a 3 in any of those 100 rolls, right? So that's kind of my thinking here, and I'm sure that that's not what they're doing. All of these guys are dogs, okay, every single one. But the more depth if you want to look at it like that, like if you roll every single time it's a 3, okay, now we've got all of this depth here. We can take on injuries, which we would never hope. We never hope, but obviously we've seen last year that it can happen. That absolutely can, unfortunately. That being said, um, I'm excited to see what this team can do. I think this is a great additions, and I am really excited about this Jaden Jackson addition. I'm going to be completely honest. Next up, we got to talk about some women's basketball. We've got the momentum going in the right direction after a win over Cincinnati. And we'll talk about that coming up right after this. Looking for tickets to your next big event, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache, but with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals, so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Game Time Picks for a while now, and here's why I love it. The curated deals make it super simple to find great tickets at a great price. No more sifting through thousands of options. I recently grabbed a super deal for Prime Seat, and I couldn't believe the value. It was a steal. The seat view feature is a game changer. Before I even hit buy, I can see exactly what my seat will look like in the venue. It's very reassuring. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Ready to make your next event even better? Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. We've pivoted now from the football scene into basketball as the Iowa State women come away with a 20-point win over Cincinnati, and this could be huge, ladies and gentlemen. You're here with Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and it seems like we may have found something here. Obviously, the win over Cincinnati stops the 2-game losing streak, which is 2 games really a streak. You can have that argument, but it certainly felt that way after the loss to Kansas State being in overtime and then TCU being what it was. It just kind of felt like a game they had to win. Either way, they beat Cincinnati 72-52. And as far as the box score goes, kind of what I was hoping to see. If you remember back, I think it was the TCU game, and it was like 31 from Addie Brown and 29 from Audie Crooks, or maybe those were backwards. But either way, it was 60 of the 69 points scored in that game came from 2 players. That was not the case in tonight's game. Addie Brown with 9, less than normal. Audie Crooks with 18, a little bit less than normal. Kelsey Jones brought 11 to the table. Ariana Jackson was 17, and Emily Ryan with 8 of her own. Then 9 more came off the bench, with Tanky bringing 6, Williams with 2, and Reagan Wilson with 1. What is that? What are we doing here? Why do I mention this? I keep saying this, and at some point, I'm kind of like, I was starting to get in my own head, like, is the point I'm making even a good one? Is this something that this team can do where they're able to spread it out and everyone scores kind of evenly in that same relative distribution model? Because that's what we've seen this team do to get wins. Is that something they can do? Because we haven't seen it really. Yes, they can do it, and they can defeat teams that way. Iowa State now 16-9, 7-5 in the conference. And we mentioned obviously Cincinnati where they were in yesterday's episode, and then we'll play Colorado up next, and they're kind of in that same realm, and we'll get to what's coming up for this team in just a few minutes. But I just wanted to highlight that every starter had 8 or more points, with only one having 8, it being Emily Ryan, Addie Brown having 9, and then everyone else double digits. And that's where I kind of talked about, you're going to have to see, if you want to see this even distribution of scoring, you can't have 2 players go for 60. You can't. If you want to take the 2 top scorers, Crooks and Ariana Jackson, from tonight, and you combine them, you come up with 35, which is just over half of what happened when Addie Brown and Audie Crooks both popped off. And who we scored more points in this one? We scored 72 to 69, being what it was last time. So I think that's an important note here. As far as rebounding, winning that rebound battle 44-32 is certainly reassuring. The majority of them being on defense with 8 offensive rebounds. You see 16 assists to the 25 field goals made. I think that's also pretty solid. You shoot about 37%, not a superb night from beyond the arc, but not a bad night by any means. You have 11 turnovers, little bit up there, but you get 4 steals back. I think this is a big win for Iowa State. I really do. Why? More than anything, it's the momentum, because you get the wins over BYU and UCF at home, and it's starting to feel like it's there. And then you go into Kansas State and you lose that one in overtime, and a little bit of a heartbreaker. Then you go and you come back home, and you take on TCU and you lose that one when 2 players just popped off. Then you go on the road and you take on Cincinnati, and this is that point where I say this team needs to go right now. This is no longer messing around. We can turn this around. This is the turnaround point. You know, when you're driving on the highway and it's like next rest stop 100 miles, you're like, gee, I should probably just stop really quick. Like that's like this, like we got to stop right now, or it's just kind of never, realistically here. And they come away with it, you know. Now they can take this into the Colorado game, then they'll face KU on the road, and they'll come back home against Houston, and then they'll have 2 on the road, and then they'll be back home against Kansas State. I see this next 5-game stretch for the Cyclones over the course of this next 20 days or so, to be 19 days, I think, by this, by the time this airs. This is must-win territory to get that momentum built up against to go up against Kansas State at the end of the year. I'm happy with how this went, though. I really am. You shoot 44% basically from the floor. Addie Brown shooting 0 of 6. That's tough. That's going to happen sometimes. I will mention, obviously, we've kind of heard a little bit of Audie Crooks playing through something, Emily Ryan playing through something, Sydney Harris out tonight, which are all kind of not great things, but they are kind of it just shows this team wasn't at full strength, and against a Cincinnati team that you held to 52 points. That's something I want to point out here as well. Obviously, you scored 72 and you beat them by 20, but you held them to 52. Remember how harshly I was talking about Iowa State and the men only putting up, 52 or so against Kansas? That's 52 exactly. And so the coin goes both ways. We held them to 52, and that's great. That's absolutely great. Now, where do we go from here? You got to carry this. You got to carry kind of where you're at mentally after a win, obviously, especially it being on the road. Then you can do it more, even better at home, in my opinion. And then, right, like the shooting and the ball movement and everything about that. This team, they're a solid team. I've said it from the beginning. I think they're better than their record. I don't know how much better than their record they are right now. I think they've kind of settled into that. Obviously, there's a few wins that I feel like they could have had, but we're seeing over time kind of where this team is falling. And I just want this team to get into a rhythm and to peak at the right time, because you'll see teams perform at their level, underperform, and perform above their level, right? That's kind of how this works. I'd like to see this team outperform what they're capable of at the end of the year, right? Is this team, as it sits right now, the favorite to win the Big 12 championship? No, they are not. So that means they're going to have to outperform, at least the projections, to win that, right? How do you do that? You build momentum. You start to feel a little bit not unstoppable or like invincible. Obviously, you can't go too far, but this is a point where you can build like confidence. Like, hey, we can make those shots. We can run the offense this way. We can rely on X versus Y versus Z versus this style or that style, right? We want to be building that right now. This is kind of that point in the season. This win over Cincinnati, obviously, or a step in the right direction. And the defense here, I don't want to step over the defense. Obviously, everyone talks about scoring. Everyone talks about offense, assists, and all those kinds of things. But you still held them to 52 points with 4 assists, right? You force 9 turnovers, which isn't a crazy number, but at least, you're getting the ball back. And so, hey, women, great win. This is where we want to be. We got to keep it moving. Speaking of keeping it moving, the question in basketball, as far as the men goes, is can they essentially rise back to where they were? If you remember just a few weeks ago, Iowa State men's kind of at the top, kind of at the top, no longer there. Can they make it back? We'll find out coming up right after this. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you are cashing out. This week, I'm looking at the board and selecting more for Travis Kelce on receiving yards and more for a quarterback's passing yardage. What I love most, fast, safe withdrawals. When I win, my cash is in my account in as little as 15 minutes. Check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie winners big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of a $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Okay, now it's time to get a little bit hypothetical here at Locked On Cyclones. Welcome in to Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The men's basketball, okay, it's something that we've got a little bit fired up about over the last few weeks, really, at this point. It's gotten a little bit ugly, okay? 3 straight losses for the Cyclones to Arizona, Kansas State, and KU. Just killers. I mean, are we serious? The Arizona one, we all know. I can't talk about it anymore. Kansas State, at home, you break the streak. Then KU, it's KU. It's Kansas. I mean, think about Mr. Brightside here. So my point being just heartbreaker after heartbreaker after heartbreaker, and I don't know where this team is, and maybe we'll have time to get to that kind of at the end of this, or maybe I'll talk about it tomorrow. But either way, I just kind of was looking at this because I was reminiscing. Where was this team at just a few weeks ago? Remember, we were like, okay, it's Arizona and Houston, then us. We're all tied all right up there, undefeated. We got a chance to take home this a regular season title, if you will, go home with the best record. And where are they at now? What are we actually looking at? So I decided to pull it up, and we're currently in 4th in the standings. It goes Houston at 1, Arizona at 2, and then you got Texas Tech ahead of us, and then Iowa State, and then Kansas actually tied with us, kind of. But I believe, I don't know if that's actual tiebreaker, but as it stands, we're at 4. Okay, now there's good news and bad news here. The bad news is that likely Iowa State has to win out to take this. The other and the good news kind of is that Iowa State doesn't need to win this by any means. I don't know how does winning out really push Iowa State's seeding up? That's only time will tell, and it's kind of determined more by the rest of the field than by anything else. But I will say, the other good news is these teams kind of play each other kind of a lot here these last couple weeks of the season. Houston, Arizona, Texas Tech, Kansas. I'm going to leave Kansas out because I don't think they're really in the same league as Houston, Arizona, Texas Tech. And luckily, we do have a win head-to-head over Texas Tech. Now, let's take a look at the rest of Iowa State's schedule. Just get this out of the way. Obviously going to have to win out, right? You're 3 games back. I don't think you could do it without winning out, but you kind of got to win out. So you got TCU, UCF, Cincinnati, Colorado, all winnable games. And we'll talk more about the TCU game this week. But these aren't games that are going to move the needle a whole lot other than your win column. Then you do take on Houston, however, the 22nd at Houston. Then you've got Arizona at home, right? And then as far as actual direct above you, that is where the list ends. But you have taken on a Texas Tech and won, right? So you've got 2 of the opponents ahead of you, and that does leave Texas Tech, like I said, and then Kansas, who's below you. You've played twice. You split with them, but they're kind of right in there with you, right? So then I took a look at Houston, who is ahead of Iowa State, or essentially kind of tied for first right now with Arizona. Their schedule, they've got, as far as notable games, Arizona, us, of course, and Texas Tech and Kansas in there. Okay. Now, what needs to happen here? Well, let's just hope that these guys just lose all their games. Like, that's one really easy way to go about this. But the other more realistic way, before I get to that, actually, I will mention really quickly, Houston's kind of struggling a little bit here too. Texas Tech, very good, defeats Houston. Then you remember what happened against UCF, 1 point game there. Okay. Then, unfortunately, then they did take out that, I guess, aggression or whatever on Utah. So that one's not very close. It's a 6 point game over KU that they get the win. And then West Virginia is West Virginia. But the Oklahoma State game, don't let the score deceive you. That was pretty close until the last few minutes. And sometimes the last few minutes, that's what's going to decide great teams from good teams. I get that, but pretty close. And Oklahoma State not exactly turning any heads at third from the bottom in the standings right now, right? So let's just keep in mind that Houston could drop one outside of these top tier games. But either way, Arizona, us, or Iowa State, I guess, Texas Tech, and Kansas, right? I could see them dropping at 3 of those. Or even if you drop 2 and then a random one to a Baylor, right? Or an Arizona State, or you play Baylor twice. It's kind of tough to beat the same team twice, sometimes. And then obviously, they'll play the top competition. So could Houston fall realistically? Yes. Very, very realistically. Then Arizona, I looked up, obviously got to do my due diligence here. Look at everyone above us. Who do they have left? Well, Texas Tech. Okay. Then Houston, of course, as I've mentioned, they've got us in Iowa State and Kansas as well. So we're kind of seeing a reoccurring theme here where these teams, they play each other quite a bit at the end of the season. Then Texas Tech here, Arizona, Houston, Kansas. Now, realistically, Texas Tech probably, in my opinion, Iowa State's greatest threat to the top of this, to come out of this regular season with the best record. I do think that Texas Tech, as it sits right now, very good team, got the momentum, the win over Baylor. After their loss to us, to Iowa State, they've rattled off 7 wins in a row. So this team is good. Very solid team. They'll have to prove it against Arizona on the 8th, which will be coming up. But they certainly have, outside of that, ASU, Oklahoma State, TCU, West Virginia, Colorado, ASU. Definitely, ASU in there twice, but winnable schedule. So Texas Tech, certainly one that I am a little nervous about. But, the Houston and the Arizona very much could be, like, we could. We absolutely could. You take one from both if you win out. This is under the hypothetical that Iowa State wins out. So you take a game back from Houston and from Arizona just on your own, just from playing, right? Then that's 2 each that they got to drop outside of that if you win out. Okay. And then you've got the tiebreaker on them. And are you telling me that Houston, it's impossible that they, Texas Tech, I just said it's hard to beat the team twice, but Texas Tech knows the formula maybe. Maybe we spin it that way, right? Or the Arizona game. Or Kansas. Are you telling me it's impossible they lose 2 of those? And I just talked about how this team seems kind of shaky. Maybe they drop one to Baylor. Maybe they drop one to ASU. I don't know. But it's not impossible. Can't tell me that. And then Arizona, on the other hand, Texas Tech, like I said, very good team. Very good team. Are you telling me they can't lose to Iowa State, obviously, and then KU at the end of the year? Then you got Houston in there too, but like that's going to go either way, right? This is going to be a little bit of eating each other alive, and you're going to need a few of these games to be lost outside of the power teams that I'm talking about at this moment. But I like where Iowa State sits as far as, is this possible? Yes, I do think so. The other side of this is the play that Iowa State is kind of going through right now, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow. I do know that, but I just like to take, we got a minute or so here. Let's talk about it. I think this Iowa State team is starting to semi-adapt without Malone. I did, this last game hurt, the Kansas game, that is, but I thought there were certainly promising signs. Of course, the reduction in turnovers, a very clear change in offensive style. And at some point, you're going to start making shots. And that's why I kind of mentioned this team just needs to see a few go in. They need to get some momentum. And then those shots start to fall. And the theory, you could have the greatest offensive game plan in the entire world, but if you don't make a single shot, it's not worth that much. So if Iowa State's able to get some of that momentum back, then you bring back a Malone at some point. I do think this team can turn it around. I think the TCU game is coming at a great time. Of course, you'd like to have seen this team turn it around 3 games ago? And how does the last 3 games turn out if the Arizona shot doesn't go in? I don't know. I can't tell you that. Unfortunately, that is not something that I know or will ever know. But as it stands right now, this team could very well come back into it. This TCU getting great opportunity for that. They just need to do it. And then Malone coming back is going to add another boost to this team, and it'll spread the floor a little bit, and we could get back to maybe how it was at the beginning of the season, offensive attack, strategy-wise, right? That's all I'm saying. Like I said, I didn't want to go too deep on that. We'll talk about it more. But this team very well could win out. Like I kind of threw that in there because it's like, well, yeah, in a perfect world where they win out, like they could. They could. They could. They could get it done. That being said, thank you for watching this point in the episode. If you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Shout out to you guys that listen every single day. You guys are the ones to make the world go around. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.